Hey guys, good afternoon on this sunny afternoon here in Costa Rica. It's actually my birthday today. So I thought, what would I like to do today for my birthday? I'd like to do a podcast. And it's the 10th podcast as well. We just celebrated 150 downloads on Spotify. I just keep saying, all great oaks come from small acorns. So 150 downloads, I call a small acorn. Let's see if we can get to 1,500 pretty soon. But today we're going to be discussing the role of a lawyer in real estate here in Costa Rica. We talk about everything from the due diligence process to the transaction with Adrian and Echeverria and Marco Fernandez from RE&B Abogados here in Costa Rica. They're a law firm that practices in a variety of different areas of law, but with a focus actually in real estate. And it's something that they know very, very well. And remember, guys, every real estate transaction here will require a lawyer stroke notary. And we go into kind of the particulars of the difference there, but it's pretty interesting. Again, we also touch on capital gains tax today as well, which is something that was very enlightening to me. But let's get started. Remember, if you have questions for future guests or anything you'd like answering, or if you'd like the guys, Adrian and Marco, to answer anything, just put it in the comments. Also, their details will be in the description. Remember to like this, guys. And again, if you do like it, subscribe, and just so that you get notified every single time that we do post a new podcast. Remember, we usually do 1 to 2 a week, and hopefully we'll be increasing that amount as we get more and more topics coming up. So let's get started. Adrian and Marco, welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. How are you guys doing?
Very well, Richard. Thank you for having us.
Great. How are you guys?
Very, very good. Thanks for taking the time. As you can see, my dog's here in the, I was just talking about kids walking in dogs. My dog's here in the office with me. So yeah, hopefully she won't bark if she sees birds outside. She usually goes a bit crazy, so I apologize.
No problem,
anyway,
no problem.
Let's get started. Now, there's been a lot of, most real estate transactions here that I'm aware of here in Costa Rica involve a lawyer. Is it necessary in all of these transactions?
Yes. In particular, in real estate transactions, I'm going to say that you need more than a lawyer. You need a notary, actually.
Okay.
So you do need well, first of all, we need to be clear on the fact that for you to be a notary, you have to be a lawyer, anyways. So, but more than the role of the lawyer, you need the role of the notary. Because the notary is the one that can draft the contracts, have the documents recorded with the National Registry. So yes, definitely for a real estate transaction, you definitely need a notary.
So there's a difference? No, I was just going to say, what's the main difference between a realtor and a notary?
Okay, well, just a small clarification. Every notary public is an attorney, but not every attorney is a notary public. Okay, so you definitely need an attorney that is a notary public in order to best represent you in any closings.
Okay, so basically, if you're going to do a real estate transaction and you have a lawyer, you need to ask them, are you a notary?
You definitely need a notary in order for the closing to take place. Okay. Because when the closing takes place, you need to register the closing at the public registry, and that only the notary publics can do that. So in order for you to record the title transfer or any changes in the corporation or whatever, you need a notary public for that to be registered.
Yeah, Richard, we need to be clear on one thing. A lawyer may draft certain private agreements between the parties, regarding a real estate transaction, but the professional that can certify documents, have documents recorded with the National Registry, that's the notary. And so typically the notary is the one that's going to have the expertise on how to draft the contracts properly, and like I said, certify the corresponding documents and submit them to the National Registry for the recording process. So even as Marco was saying, you can be a lawyer without being a notary, but you cannot be a notary without being a lawyer. So it's in your best interest to be advised by a notary. That's the best professional to assist you with this.
I think that's really smart, listeners. So listen in there. If you're doing a real estate transaction, you should ask the lawyer if they were also a notary as well, or you should really basically find a notary because they're the ones that are going to have to register it in the registro here in Costa Rica and make those changes. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely.
Correct.
And not only the transfer deed, I mean, we depending on the type of transaction, like powers of attorney, as Marco was mentioning, I mean, if you need to make changes in the corporation, those documents, they have to be certified or notarized, and some of them have to be recorded with the National Registry. You will need a notary for that.
Well, what is the easiest way to find a notary then, guys? And find a good one? Like, or is there no such thing as a good notary? All notaries are notaries.
Well, no, I mean, I do think that, well, in Costa Rica, there is some sort of, it's called the Dirección Nacional de Notariado, which is like a notary bar. Every notary has to be registered with them. So if you have no idea where to contact one, I mean, you can get information from notaries on the notary bar database. But most likely, like in any other profession, yeah, I would say it's the word of mouth. I mean, you ask for reference for, your friends, the realtor that you're working with could refer you to a reputable notary, because it's definitely important to work with someone that has the expertise and the good reputation to assist you with your investment here.
Basically, the best filter will be the realtors.
Yeah.
They will never recommend a bad notary because it's also in their best interest that everything goes okay. So pretty much, as Adrian says, it's a mouth-to-mouth or brokers referring to an experienced notary public that they have worked with. So pretty much any realtor normally will have a good notary public by its sides or as part of this team.
Well, I mean, they don't get paid, right? Unless the notary is done correctly. So yeah, it's in their best interests. And I mean, whose lawyer should you use in the real estate transaction? Because, I can't remember buying my house, to be honest with you, it was like 16 years ago, but I actually want to say that we used the seller's lawyer in this circumstance, or notary. I mean, is there a difference here, or does it not really matter?
Well, technically, the notary has to be impartial. I mean, meaning that the notary is not supposed to help more one of the parties than the other.
Of course.
It should be a fair deal, of course. But in practice, it's better to have your notary, if you are the buyer, to have your notary taking care of the transaction. I would advise to have the buyer select the notary that is going to be the notary on record of that transaction, because it's in the best interest of the buyer to make sure that the documents are recorded properly with the National Registry, and the title of the property will be in the buyer's, or recorded in the buyer's name. I would say that's the rule of thumb. There are other situations depending on the type of closing, of course. For example, if there's seller financing, most likely the seller will want his attorney, his notary, to take care of the transaction, because he will carry the financing. So it means that he wants to make sure that the mortgage or the securing structure is properly recorded with the National Registry.
But normally the question that you should ask is, who is the attorney taking care of, or the notary public taking care of?
Yep.
If you choose the seller's attorney, of course, he will be looking for the best interest of his prior client or his own client, the seller. So it's always advisable to have the purchaser attorney to be the one taking care of the closing, or depending on the type of transaction, as Adrian says, if there's seller financing, then the seller's attorney will say, no, I need to step up because I want to make sure that the mortgage documents are protecting my client as creditor. So it depends on the type of closing, but normally the buyer's attorney or notary publics are the ones that take the lead in the closings.
Or bring your attorney notary and let them bring their notary attorney as well, and then they can talk together in their own legal language.
It can be a co-notary deal. That's absolutely I mean, no problem with that. It's actually a good idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, go on. Sorry, Michael.
But then there's a quick question. That's another important question. Who's paying for the closing costs?
I was about to ask that question. That's a great question. Who typically pays?
Well, if the purchaser is paying for 100% of the closing costs, then he's already paying for his representation. If another notary public or attorney jumps in, who's going to be paying for that if the purchaser is going to be paying for the closing costs? So normally how it happens is the purchaser's closing attorney takes a lead of the closing, but there's always a window for the seller's attorney just to revise the documents prepared by the buyer's attorney.
Yeah.
But that will be at his sole expense.
Okay.
The purchaser should not be paying for the seller's lawyer.
Okay. I think that's great advice, guys. I mean, it's to summarize is basically if you're buying property, bring your own notary.
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
And pay the fees yourself, because basically then they're on your side, if that makes sense. Even though they are impartial, you're the one paying. So they'll kind of, I suppose, take care of you, but they're really impartial.
Well, I mean, technically, you're right. Technically, the notary should be impartial, but let's face it. On the street, if it's not your notary, you won't feel comfortable. On the notary just being 100% focusing on protecting your interests. So it's always advised to have your own counsel on the transaction.
I suppose it would be like if I was a referee in arbitro and Saprissa and La Liga were playing, but really I'm a Saprissa fan. I'll try and be impartial, but I'm really not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. For listeners, I'm sure they have no idea what we're talking about when they say La Liga Saprissa, but there are two soccer teams here in Costa Rica, guys, that have a bit of rivalry. We could say that, put it that way. So,
Saprissa is the bad one.
Yeah, it'd be like Mexico playing the US in soccer.
Yeah, correct.
So now let's just, I mean, how much typically are, legal fees for a real estate transaction? Are they a percentage of the cost? Are they a fixed cost? Is it negotiable? Is it not? I mean, how does that work?
Okay. As I mentioned before, there is a notary bar here and an attorney bar, actually, that already established some sort of like a chart of fees that are already established based on percentages. Most of them. So on real estate transactions, the notary fees is going to be around 1.25% of the purchase price of the value of the transaction. That's in tiers. I mean, there's depending on the value and depending on the transaction, the percentage can go up or down a little bit, but typically you can round it up at 1.25%.
And how negotiable is that?
Yeah, I mean, as Adrian says, the bar establishes the minimum that you should charge. You should not be able to charge that. But besides that, this is only for registering the title transfer. There are some additional costs, such as due diligence, escrow, affidavits, powers of attorney. If the buyer wants to set up a new corporation to purchase, I know that's another question we're going to be addressing later on. But those are additional costs that, yes, those can be negotiated. But the ones that imply registering public documents in the public registry, there's a set minimum that you cannot lower that. That's illegal, and you can get sanctioned. I mean, this fees chart that we were mentioning before, they established minimum amounts. So technically, notaries cannot charge under those amounts. They could be exposed to sanctions from the notary bar for doing that. So they can be negotiated as long as the amount goes up or above the minimum, but not under the minimum. Okay.
Well, I think that's great advice.
But that's on legal fees. On expenses or recording of stamps, it's always a percentage that is also based on whether the value or the transaction or the registered value of the property. We're talking about a real estate transaction, like the sale of a house. Then depending on whether the purchase price or the registered value of that property, whichever amount is higher, then that's the amount that you have to use to calculate those expenses. And when I say expenses, I mean the legal stamps and recording fees and the transfer tax. The transfer tax is a fixed fee of 1.5%. and the recording stamps and the legal stamps and the recording fees, those are around 0.8, 0.9% of the of that parameter that I mentioned.
Okay. Sorry, there's the dog barking. I told you a dog barking. I'm gonna let her out. Just give me 2 seconds. My daughter's just come back.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Well, we were talking, I understand, we were talking about legal fees and expenses, and he needed to bark, of course.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, there are quite a few fees, that incur in actually transferring, I suppose real estate there. I just wanted to quickly take a look, because somebody asked me today, I was having a conversation with someone about the value of properties in the register here. Are they accurate or are they not? And if they're not, why aren't they?
They might not be accurate. They might not be accurate because the database is not up to date.
Right.
The National Registry, that database should be linked with the municipality, and I mean, in my opinion, they should be connected in the sense that the same value that you have recorded with the municipality should be the one reflected with the National Registry, but that information is not always up to date.
Okay. So you could have a piece of property that, say, is worth $1 million by real estate standards, but could be worth $100,000 in the registry.
Absolutely.
Yes, but that's another important topic that I don't know if we can touch today or that's for another podcast, is the capital gains tax.
Okay.
If you're going to be selling the property for a higher value than the one that you purchased, you're supposed to pay capital gains tax. So it's always advisable to have all the values updated either in the municipality or in the public registry, because if not, if you say that example, if you have a $1 million property with a declared value of 100,000 colones, then imagine how much you're going to be paying for capital gains taxes.
Okay. And what is capital gains in Costa Rica?
The capital gains right now, the fee is 15%. There is basically the rule of thumb is that it's going to be for inactive corporations. It's going to be at 15% on the gain, or 2.25% on the purchase price. But that is just like an option that you have for the first time that you sell the property.
Yeah, the 2.25% you can only use once.
Okay.
With the property, and it will be your choice depending if 2.25% of the whole total purchase price is less than the 50% out of the difference.
Okay.
So you will have to do the math there.
But if those things are, I'm sorry, those things are, I would say that they should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis and to see what's the most beneficial option for each client, depending on the situation. Because you also need to analyze when the property was bought, because this option applies if you bought the property before, I think it's July 1st, 2019, which is when this capital gain law became into effect.
My birthday.
So yeah. So that's one of the things that it would have to be. I believe that it has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis to advise, properly each client. But back to the expenses that we were talking before, it's the same thing. And the expenses or the closing costs associated to a real estate transaction, those might change depending on the additional services that the client will need, like due diligence, or if a corporation needs to be created, things like that. Powers of attorney need to be set up. So those costs could increase a little bit the closing costs, but typically you could say that the closing costs are going to be around 3.7%, almost 4% of the purchase price.
Okay. Well, I mean, there are two subjects that I want to touch on for the rest of the podcast. I think that you bring up a great point there, really, about the capital gains, and I think probably a different podcast on that one. But I mean, just something really to bear in mind. But also is, I take it would be kind of a lawyer that would help you analyze what's the best thing to do there. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
Okay. And I mean, that would come all with basically kind of the due diligence, correct? But I mean, let's talk a little bit about due diligence. And then I just want to get to maybe the last question, kind of more about registering in a personal name versus a company. But let's talk due diligence, as we mentioned it a couple of times here. I mean, what stuff are you doing when you do due diligence, gents? Like when someone's like, hey, I'm looking to buy a property, I'd like to contract you to do due diligence. I mean, what stuff do you guys have a checklist you run through?
Yes, there's a checklist. Basically, the due diligence is, in my opinion, the most important part in a property acquisition process, because it will let you know if you're okay to go, or if there's a red flag and you say no, you won't. We don't recommend you to buy. Okay. What do we check? We check that the property is up to date with property taxes. If it's a condo, that the HOA fees are up to date. Especially if there is no litigation or annotation or judicial lawsuits attached to the property or to the seller. We check the seller if it's a corporation or a personal name. We check if the corporation that sells has any obligations for labor, for example, if it's registered at Caja, if the property has any outstanding mortgages or any liens that might affect the property transaction.
Luxury taxes also. We also check that if the property qualifies or is exposed to luxury tax. That's important. So most of the information we can obtain that from public records like the National Registry or the municipality. Some others like the HOA fees, we get that letter from the HOA administrator. So we also need obviously seller's cooperation on that. Some documents have to be provided by the seller, but usually that's what we do. I mean, the information that we can get from public records, we do it on our own. The rest of the information we request it from the seller, and then we make sure that that the property and the title are clean and free to be transferred. We also check the survey map, for example, to just make sure that the property has the corresponding survey map attached to the title. That's important as well.
Guys, I never knew it was this deep that you guys would go when you did due diligence on real estate. But again, I've heard some horror stories sometimes. Again, it doesn't happen as much nowadays. I think things have cleaned up quite a bit. But this is great information for the listeners here. Let's jump quickly back to the company versus person. I mean, for instance, I have my car in my name, but my house is in a corporation. I have friends that have their house in their own name. I mean, why would someone choose one over the other, guys?
Well, if we were having this discussion like 5 years ago, most of the attorneys recommended the purchasers to have everything through corporations. Why? Because of asset protection, contingency protection. Because what happens if you had a car under a corporation, but you got in trouble? They will be going after you personally and every single asset that you have under your personal name. If you had the assets under a corporation, that used to give you, and that's a key question, used to give you some type of secrecy and anonymity of who owns the corporation and give you some type of a protection veil there. What happened recently? That the corporation stopped being anonymous. You need to file a shareholders registry. New taxes were enforced. Now you have to declare if an active corporation sold assets, you have to file a declaration. So annual taxes to maintain your corporation increase substantially. So that's the key question that the clients say, okay, it's getting too expensive to have a corporation owning my property. I'd rather have everything under my personal name right now because it will be saving me annual expenses, paying you guys as attorneys to file all the declaration and pretty much to have the compliance needed for the corporation to be up to date. You have to worry about corporate taxes, shareholders registry declaration, income tax. And there's a lot of things associated with corporations that are not making it attractive as an option right now. So clients right now are choosing and say, okay, I'd rather absorb that contingency, asset protection risk, and save some money, and having that under my personal name. So pretty much that sums the question up.
Actually, Richard, I mean, and I agree with what Marco was saying. it's but right now, because of the recent changes in the regulations, like Marco mentioned, I mean, a few years ago, the rule of thumb was create your corporation and, purchase property under your corporation. And if you're going to have a house, you use one corporation for the house. If you're going to have a car, you use a separate corporation for the car, because legally the patrimony of the corporation, of a corporation, is separate from the patrimony of other corporations and from your personal patrimony as well. So you use that to protect your assets. Okay. But now, the regulations have changed. Now it's important then to discuss with the client the profile and the purpose of their investment. I mean, are they buying the property for their personal use? I'll give you an example. If you are a retired foreigner that wants to buy a second home here because they want to come, they want to come down here just to spend the winter, avoid the winter in the northern hemisphere, right? And they want to come here for a few months. They just want to have a condo here for personal use. They're retired. They don't want to. They will most likely they will not want to deal with the maintenance of the corporation that Marco was explaining before. Annual filings, paying corporate taxes, and filing shareholders declaration and things like that. So that person will probably purchase the property in their personal name. Okay. But on the other hand, if you are an entrepreneur, you're an investor, you're looking at buying different properties because you are into the rental business, for that person will probably make more sense to have a corporation, because that person will be used to dealing with accountants, like monthly filings for tax returns, annual filings, paying corporate taxes. It will be part of the business. So for that type of investor, maybe using a corporation is the best way to go. But then there is, I don't think there is like a fixed answer for this. It will depend on the purpose or the type, the profile of the investor that is, that you have with you.
Well, what about if I have that corporation and I sell that property, am I just doing a share transfer and no change in the registro? I mean, what happens there? Because that used to be it. Like I'd have this corporation, I had 100 shares, I'd transfer the new shares to the new owner, and they would be the new owner of the corporation. There would be like no transfer in the registro, if that makes sense, because the corporation is still the owner.
If we were talking about 5 years ago, that makes sense. Right. I mean, people did consider as absorbing the existing corporation, because in that time, you didn't have to pay transfer tax for that.
Yep.
However, new laws, there's called, indirect title transfer tax. So regardless if you assume a corporation and they assign the shares to you, you still have to pay 1.5% of the sales value as transfer tax. So that completely scares the incentive of acquiring an existing corporation. That only from the expenses part, but it's also the contingency part.
Yeah.
There's always some things that don't appear in the due diligence. If a corporation acquired a private loan or sent
like a promissory note.
Promissory notes, that's private documents that is not public records.
Yeah.
So we always recommend the clients, why absorb that risk for saving at that time the transfer tax? Right now, the only thing that you might save in that option is the 0.8% for title and legal stamp, registered stamp at the public registry. So if you see the numbers, it's not worth taking that risk for saving that little money for that. So
yeah. You can still do it. I mean, it is still a legally viable option to take over, seller's corporation in order to acquire the property. But like Marco mentioned, I mean, right now you inherit the risk of any liability that could be attached to the corporation, not necessarily to the property, to the corporation, like labor contracts, or as we mentioned, the promissory note, documents that are not recorded in any public record. So unless the seller discloses them, then it will be impossible for the buyer to find out until they are hit with the lawsuit. And you still have to pay the transfer tax no matter what. So the advantage that it used to have years ago of saving some money on the closing costs, because you would dodge the bullet of the transfer tax, that's no longer an option. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for that.
So, I mean, what's your suggestion for me? I have a house that I bought in 2005. It's in a corporation. My wife and I own it. It's still in a corporation, an active corporation. I think we pay, I can't remember how much it is, a couple $100 a year, for that corporation. I mean, do I keep it in a corporation, or do you say I should put it into, probably my wife's name's better. She'd be happy to hear that. But I mean, what would you guys suggest in that circumstance?
I think in your case, if you already have the corporation and I mean, you have it with your wife, it might be just easier to keep it that way.
Okay.
But again, I mean, that's you raise the capital gains question again. If you want to transfer that to your wife, what value are you going to be valuing that transfer for? You cannot donate, or you cannot give it away, because if she wants to sell it afterwards, she's going to be bounded with the capital gains.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of things to think about here, guys. I mean, Costa Rica's moved pretty quickly in the past couple of years. I mean, 15 years ago, it was all,
our new regulations have changed the scenario differently. So the approach is not the same as it was 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. There are certain things that are even more recent than that, like capital gains. That's something that just less than 2 years ago came into effect.
Wow.
So I think that it's not easy to give just a general advice to everyone to follow. I think it's always wise to sit down with the client, analyze the big picture of their situation, how you need to also consider even their estate planning, for example. If they have a will, if they have a living trust, if they're foreigners, do they have a living trust in the States? Do they have their corporation linked or attached to that living trust in the States? There are a lot of different elements that you need to consider in order to provide the proper advice and determine whether it's, for example, in their case, whether it would be a good idea to transfer all the assets that they have right now into their personal names and get rid of the corporations. Yeah. Might not be the case. It could be the case. It's something that I think it's better to discuss on a case-by-case basis.
I mean, say I had it in my personal name. I had a piece of property, had it in my personal name. Or if someone died and the inheritance was this, is it easier, I suppose, to get the property transferred, because just say, I don't know, it was in my name, I died, it's now becomes my kids. Is it easier for the transaction if it was just in my name rather than a corporation's name that I wholly owned?
It depends on your estate planning, but if your property was in your name and you have a will, for example, if you had a will set up, then it's going to be the same process. I mean, that will have to be executed. That has to be submitted to a probate process. Yep. And the only difference would be whether the probate process is held over the property directly or over the shares of your corporation.
Okay. But it kind of sounds like it would probably be a little bit easier if it was in my name, just because it would be me. I wouldn't have to then transfer shares and then transfer the property. But yeah. Okay. Lots of things to think about here. Wow, I think I may need a contract you guys to do my estate planning. Well, not that I have that much stuff, but anyway. I mean, how different is the due diligence that you guys do when somebody's looking to buy a business rather than doing a real estate transaction? I mean, you mentioned stuff there about, CAHA, tax obligations, that kind of stuff. What's the main difference of the due diligence?
Wow, you have to be very thorough about the accounting, about the tax declarations, permitting, licensing, lease agreements, labor contracts. Wow, that's a lot more of things you should dig around.
The process might be similar, I would say, in regards regarding the due diligence. It's just that you have to review more information. So Marco mentioned, you need to consider permitting, you need to consider license, you need to consider also accountings. You need to go. You don't. In that case, you don't only do the due diligence on the property if the business includes a property, but you do it on the corporation and the business itself, the operation of the business. For example, if it's a hotel, you need to make sure that all the permits, the ICT is up to date. Everything that is necessary to operate the business, all of that has to be reviewed.
Okay. Tax
filings, income tax, value-added tax, the famous VAT tax that we have, all that. Wow. All that has to be reviewed and verified. So just to make sure that the buyer will not acquire any contingency.
It sounds like you guys are like juggling chainsaws over there with all this stuff that you guys need to remember and the due diligence that you need to do when somebody wants to buy real estate or buy a business. So, but I mean, you guys have been doing this for a long time, so I'm sure it's a bit of a walk in the park, as we would say, for you guys.
Depending, some properties are more easy, are a little bit harder than others.
It's never a walk in the park. There's always something.
I'm sure.
There's no easy closing.
True. I mean, if it was easy, nobody would need you guys, right? So, my last question to you guys, the one that I like to ask everyone. I mean, if you guys inherited $500,000, or maybe you can answer this separately, and you had to invest it in, say, Latin America, it could be Costa Rica, it could be anywhere in Latin America. What would you do with it and why, gents?
Wow.
Well, that's a tough question, and that's a tough question. And I go back to my idea of it depends on the profile of the client that he have.
But what about you? I'm talking you. I mean, you inherit $500,000 and someone's like, hey, Adrian, you need to invest this in a business or something in Costa Rica. It could be bricks and mortar. It can be a business. What would you do? Where would you buy?
Well, right now, with the current conditions, in my experience on the real estate market on the Central Pacific, which is the area that I know the most,
yep.
I like real estate. So I would definitely, invest some money on real estate on this, on the Pacific. I think that there are good opportunities to buy property, and the rentals will do well. I have clients that have their properties in Airbnb. Yep. And or they rent it to themselves, and they're really happy. They're making good money, and the value of the property is it's also positive these days.
Yeah. I mean, it's been pretty incredible that, again, recently the value of properties has started to increase a bit, where it's been pretty steady here in Costa Rica over the years. And there's still
and I understand that the situation, for example, maybe in the Central Valley might be different, but at least on the Central Pacific area, like I said, that's the area that I know the most. Things have been, way better than we expected because of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were expecting to go through a very, very difficult time. But the second semester of 2020 and the beginning of this year has been, incredible. I have to say incredible, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 06, 07, 08. It's pretty, there's quite a lot of deals out there at the moment. Again, most realtors that I speak to, they say their problem is they don't have enough products. So I'm sure that we'll be seeing some construction happening soon. But Marco, to you, what would you do?
Well, I will be investing in something that gives me some rental income return, and I will pretty much try to invest in a small lot in the beach and build a small project that I'm actually trying to get involved right now. And it's building container homes.
Awesome.
And pretty much you can invest, I don't know, 35,000 and have a very nice small container that you can rent for surfers, for something like that. You can do commercial, you can do offices. So I'm trying to, if I had those funds, I would definitely purchase a lot, have 4 or 5 containers there and rent it out. If it works, then I'll try to develop a phase 2 or whatever, but I will definitely invest in something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's most people I speak to on this podcast, I leave it completely open about whatever business that they'd like to invest into. I mean, it could be anything from, I don't know, I'm going to, set up a cryptocurrency exchange here in Latin America to buying real estate. Everyone keeps leaning towards real estate at the moment, just because, Costa Rica is just on fire with regards to its brand, people wanting to come here. Potentially, we've got this digital nomad visa coming through very quickly. It's exciting things happening here in Costa Rica, and I can only, it's only going to get better and better, I hope.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Cryptocurrency is too volatile right now. I mean, you can make a lot of money and you can lose a lot of money.
True.
So real estate should be a little bit more steady.
Yep.
And yeah, again, back to my questions. I will definitely try to invest in having container homes to bring up the digital nomads.
That's
great.
That's very, very smart. Well, Adrian and Marco, it's, thanks again for your time. Anyone that wants to contact you guys, I'll put all the contact details in the description down below. As you can see, both of you are a wealth of knowledge. You guys have tons of experience. So I think that anybody that's looking to buy real estate, buy a business, or do anything here in Costa Rica should probably reach out to you. And I really appreciate your time, gents. And I'm sure at some point we'll get you on in the future to talk about capital gains.
Anytime,
Sure,
Richard.
anytime, Richard. The pleasure.
Wow. Thanks very much, guys. You guys have been awesome.
Thanks, man.
Thank
Take care.
you. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye.